welcome. My name's Graham Bell. I'm the chair of the committee, independent member. Great to have so many people on the call. I think we've just done attendance and apologies. Have we got apologies from anybody else, Andrea, that we just need to cover off? Do you know? I think we've got everybody represented at least. Grand, thank you. So I just wanted to. I mean, there is an obvious point at which we say thank you and good luck to those members for whom this is their final meeting, which is Councillor Little and David Prevlin. And I, as well as saying thank you, and I think on behalf of the committee and on behalf of TFN for the contribution that you've made, there is a lot that you can read about committees and the traits and characteristics of committees and audit committees in particular. And you read about courage and you read about curiosity, independence. But I think the thing that's often overlooked is that the traits of the committee are the traits of the committee members. The committee is its members. And I think if you only look at the contribution that Councillor Little and David have made, and you think about experience and insight, when people leave, you can view it in a number of different ways. You can either look back or you can look forward. And I guess I tend to look forward because I'm very conscious that the committee will lose that experience and insight, and I think it'd be really difficult to replace that. So I'm also conscious that since the last meeting we've also lost Councillor Robinson from the committee. So I think at some point, Keith and Paul, during the meeting today, if we can cover off perhaps some of the points associated with committee membership and just give people an opportunity to contribute to what we think it means and how we think we take that forward, that would be helpful. But just at the moment, at the head of the meeting, again, I just wanted to say thank you to Keith and to David. And I didn't know, Keith, David, whether you just wanted to provide your own summary rather than us all providing it for you.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Yeah, I mean, this is an important committee. It's obviously a vital committee for the running and the work that Transport for the North has to do. And the reason I got involved was, as Karen knows, I tend to end up on finance and general purposes committees or audit committees. I did with the NHS, I did with Cumbria County Council. And to be honest with you, maths was my worst subject at school. Why people keep thinking I'm the right person to be on audit and assurance committees, I have no idea. But I'm also a person that does realise that if you're going to do something, then you need to participate and be fully involved. And the reason I joined Transport for the North Audit and Governance Committee was because it had 3 meetings and was never quorate. And that's not right. It's not what should be. So I said, yes, I would join the committee, which I did about 4 years ago now. And I think I've attended every meeting, travelling up and down the country, when trains are running, of course, but last 2 years, really, a lot of it's been on Teams. So, you know, I'm very happy to contribute. I'm very happy to take a role as vice chair, and I've been happy with that. I always have the greatest respect for finance officers. I think that's a huge role that they take on, and I have a great deal of faith that the job's getting done properly. And because we have national audit looking at us and we have internal teams looking at us, then there's a lot of assurance there that the job's being done properly. Nevertheless, questions can be asked, and people can get a better understanding. But I've already spoken at Transport for the North's board, pre-board meeting, about the importance of this committee, and I'm sure at the next meeting we have, we can persuade one or two people, new members, to come forward and support this committee, and to support the financial team, Paul and his team, that are taking the work forward. But again, without people like yourself, Graham, the independents who come and join us, it isn't possible for it to work. But it's been a pleasure for me. I've met a lot of very competent, very capable people, and recently to be sitting on the board looking for a new finance officer, a 151 officer, again, is a big learning curve for me, and quite enjoyable. So thanks, Graham, for the opportunity, and I will obviously wish the committee, its officers, best wishes for the future going forward.
You're on mute, Graham.
Sorry, David. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. It's my motivations were somewhat more practical than Keith's higher call. When Ian advertised the roles for the independent members back in 2018, I'd just taken a step back from my academic career to look after my children, and I saw this as a sort of two-pronged thing to sort of keep up my sort of committee work. I was involved in the leadership level of the university, but also to get out and talk to some adults every now and again. So initially, when we were having our meetings in Manchester and Leeds and around the region, it was, but of course that all got closed down about 18 months after we started, and but I have enjoyed it. I'm a bit of a public transport nerd in my spare time, and so I'm an advocate for a robust, strong, functioning public transport system. And so, if I can play just a small part in doing that across the north, then it's been my pleasure. The reason I'm leaving is I'm going back full time to my academic career. I'm starting on the 1st of March as Associate Dean of Education at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, which with LSTM's worldwide reach means that I'm going to be travelling quite a bit. And so I just I figured it wouldn't be fair in terms of commitment to try and fit this in. But yeah, it's been my pleasure, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Thanks, David. And everybody needs nerds occasionally, so don't feel bad about. Now, I just wanted to provide Paul with a very quick opportunity just to say something, because it would be unusual, Paul, I think, if somebody didn't say something about Keith and Liam and David from a TFN perspective. You're on mute, sorry, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, I fully appreciate it. Look, I mean, I think it's interesting. It's interesting, Keith, you say you've not got a numbers background, but I think this committee is not necessarily about numbers. It's about a sense of reason, a sense of challenge, and yourself and David and other members have done that, and very well. And I think we welcome that. We're a very sort of open and transparent organisation, and we welcome the challenges that have come from you and the wider team. I think what's interesting, if you reflect on the continuity in the organisation, this committee and its independent members and the external and the internal audit that's been reporting into it is actually probably one of the most one of the areas with the highest level of continuity in the organisation since its inception. Keith, you said you've been here for 4 years. Karen, you've been here since inception, and as have Alex in the internal audit function. So it is a good system. It is, and I suppose it's allowed for a transition of personnel from our side, and that's worked very well. But that was partly done because of the consistency from all the members' side and all the teams that are reporting into it. I found your collective involvement hugely beneficial, and I know, Keith, that Ian previously had at times needed to speak to you about some quite important matters, and obviously that was extremely valuable to him as an independent view, and that's something that hopefully it isn't needed very much, but when it is needed, a sensible independent ear is critical. So thank you on behalf of the organisation. It's a better organisation for your involvement, and hopefully we can build on your legacy.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for those comments.
Now, hopefully people will forgive that slightly off-script focus on people. When's the last time we focused on people would be my challenge back. So that was good. Right, if folk are happy to carry on, if we jump back to the agenda, I just wanted to confirm whether there were any declarations of interest from members on topics covered in the agenda. If not, if we're happy to carry on. The minutes from the previous meeting, hopefully everybody has had sight of those. Andrea mentioned earlier that there was Kieran Barker from RSM wasn't recorded as being in attendance previously, but we'll capture that as part of this set of meetings. I was is Kevin made it? He hasn't, has he? There was a question in the minutes about communication security, and I don't know whether as part of the EVCI deep dive, I can't remember as actually covering that off. If we can just capture that as part of the minutes, we can hopefully get an answer back to.
Graham, if I could update the members about that. There was an exchange between Kevin and our IT function. So again, the concern that Kevin had, what we did was we just connected him to our IT guys, and he articulated it quite clearly, and then was given the assurance that there wasn't a concern transferring information to him as outside the TFN network. So he was comfortable with the response.
If yes, great, thanks, Paul. If we can just capture that, Andrew,
yes.
just to reflect the fact that it's been covered off, that would be helpful. Just going through the minutes, there is an update, obviously, in terms of the quarterly operating report on the KPIs. That was something that was outstanding from the last meeting. Treasury management is captured as part of the agenda, so that picks up the financial update point. There is an update, obviously, from external audit, and there has been further communication around the pensions situations. That was mentioned in the minutes as well. And we have the annual governance statement on the agenda picked up from the minutes too. So I didn't. Other than those points, I'm happy with the minutes. If everybody else is, we'll carry on. So I think that takes us straight into the quarterly operating report. I thought the summary, the chief exec summary at the front, was actually really powerful. I don't know whether that's made its way onto the web or not, but I think it's a great way of articulating how TFN is seeking to deliver better outcomes and how it seeks to deliver value. I just thought it was a really good update. But yeah, over to you, Paul or Tim, in terms of an update on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this is Tim, isn't it? Tim, are you comfortable? Are you okay with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Graham. That's really helpful feedback. We have evolved the operating reports, not least in moving it from it was previously a monthly operating report, and in some ways actually moving to quarterly is that it allows us to sort of better summarise the activity that's happened. This particular operating report relates to quarter three, the period October to December. It's the period in which not only were a large number of TFM work streams delivered, but it was also the period in which we were bringing together everything in preparation for TFN's next strategic transport plan, which is sort of the current big activity across a number of teams, led by strategy, and due to be considered by the board in March. So yeah, it was a really important quarter. Lots delivered, lots going on around the outside as well. I'll take the detail as read, but really happy to sort of pick up questions. And I guess again, just in the sort of spirit of looking ahead, Graham, I think on the key performance indicators, we're at a point now where we've got sort of 5 completely on track. Sorry, 5 achieved, 7 on track, the rest in progress, and much of that does relate to the work that we'd continue to do around the STP, around the Northern Powers Independent Economic Review, the further work that we're doing to sort of finish some of the research, both the research work around decarbonisation, but also the work on EVCI this year. We only really have 2 sort of KPIs that we're flagging as delayed, and one of those is around connected mobility, where we've had some internal capacity and recruitment issues which have delayed activity. The other is we had a KPI around the what's known as the Leeds Area Study, which is actually about how HS2 services can be extended to Leeds following the Integrated Rail Plan. And I think, as many members will know, that's a study that was announced by the department following the Integrated Rail Plan in November 21, and we are still waiting for government to publish the terms of reference for that. So, those 2 KPIs aside, we're either there or we're on track for delivery for the rest of the year. I don't know, Paul, whether you particularly in these meetings pick up the finance elements, the quarterly operator report, but I think that's in terms of.
We don't, but we could. I mean, happy to. We take it as read. Again, it is a historical view. So it's a backward look. So I think what I'm always keen to do is to look forward. So we could touch on the budget and business planning process that we're doing, if that's of any help, Graham.
I think a high level view, Paul, is always useful, because I'm in the same van as Keith when it comes to numbers proficiency. So a couple of headlines I think would be helpful.
Yeah. So I mean, broadly speaking, I mean, since the funding allocation changed a year ago, and it's now been so that was the significant drop from what was the previous funding allocation that had been pared back in year. So we got back to a position through the department of something that was more akin to our expected run costs. So as you would expect, because a lot of it is about people, capability and capacity, you would expect to see less variance now. I mean, in very broad terms, we and parking the hosted budgets of Rail North Partnership and NPR team, we have about £8 million worth of activity, and of that £8 million, about 6 of it is people. $1 million of it is, the infrastructure for the people to provide the service, and then about £1 million of professional services, which is buying expertise that isn't in place within the team or is very specialist. So as a consequence of that, you would expect there to be very little variance against that operational budget, because probably only 1/8 of it is going to be subject to any to timing differences. Everything else is set in stone. In terms of the other areas, in terms of the hosted services, which is the Rail North Partnership and the NPR team side, there were quite healthy ring-fence budgets around NPR team, and which was known. But to the extent they're not committed, they would be just returned to the department at the end of the year, or potentially rolled over as we firm up the services for next year, which kind of feeds well into the budget and business planning process. So we're in the middle of the business planning process as we speak, or well, I say in the middle, coming towards the end of it now. And we've had to, as a business, we've focused on activities that we must do. You know, we don't have the luxury of doing a lot of activity that is on the fringes. So it's become a, you know, what are our core duties? What do we must do to move forward? And that's formed the basis of our business plan. And then the big change this year in relation to the funding allocation is the introduction of the Centre of Excellence. Now, one could argue that we were beginning to try and develop that product last year, and we were, you know, the in-year funding work that was done. So members will recall that we had about 336,000 of in-year funding, and that was developing initiatives for other STBs and the local authorities. That was beginning to introduce the Centre of Excellence. And now the department have gone further and said, well, we'd like to give you 700,000 a year for 2 years to further develop that Centre of Excellence. And I think it's probably safe to say that I think our view is, I think 700,000 as a level of activity is probably about right. Oh, hello, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Kevin, just talking about some of the numbers. You're on mute, Kevin. Here we go. Maybe just wait for him to.
There you go.
There we go. Hi, Kevin.
Apologies, everyone. I've had terrible trouble trying to connect this morning. Gary's had to sort me out at your end.
Okay.
So apologies.
That's great. Kevin, you probably know everybody, apart from probably one person on the call is Katie. Katie Day's joined us as the Director of Strategy, Communication, Stakeholder, and it also encompasses TAME as well. So I'm sure they'll get a chance to say hello at some stage. I was just talking about the budget and business planning process, Kevin, and just at the back end of it now. And so it's tight. And the interesting thing from a budget perspective is, I don't know if members will recall, but a year, well, actually it was in June, June of last year, because obviously we had the big reduction in costs that was required to align ourselves to the funding. But what we've that needed to be done, and now it's been done. We're now at a more sustainable level. But the interesting question is that what we highlighted a year ago was that a year ago in year 4, looking forward, we highlighted sustainability issues if we retained funding at 6.5 million, and because we needed to do that to set a base level. And what the department have done is confirmed for the next 2 years the funding levels will be 6.5 million with some extra funding for Centre of Excellence. So the sustainability issue that we highlighted has been brought forward a year. Well, we've just rolled forward a year, so it's becoming live, and we're in discussions with the department about how we best manage that. And we're comfortable and confident that we can have a sensible discussion, and we'll build in budget assumptions that we'll share with. I know Sally's on the call. Sally and Andy will have a session with them to explain our underlying business assumptions, which I think are reasonable. And this is all gearing up towards delivering a budget and business plan by the 23rd of March. Yeah, so we're getting to the stage now where we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's to make sure that we get something to the board and get the appropriate delegation for the year ahead.
Great.
Happy to take any questions on that, by the way.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions or observations or comments.
Graham, it's Keith. I think, Graham, the big issue is for Transport for the North is the transitions it's gone through in the last 12, 18 months following the Williams SHAP review. And obviously its relationship with government has changed dramatically now from what our original present debtor was as to what it is today. I think it's probably a better position for us today, in as much as we're doing this partnership type of work, and we're more of an advisory role, if you like. And I think for the staff, that's been a big difference. I think with the change in chairman of the board, the new chief executive who's been with us now for 12 or 18 months. There's a different emphasis now on how transport for the north is going forward, and rail north to that aspect as well. And I think, you know, the future is potentially very good, very bright, but who knows what's going to happen with changes. Thanks.
Could I respond, Graham, if that's okay? Your sentiments are exactly right, Keith. I mean, it's you know, there was a 2-year settlement given by the department because that's all they could do within the spending review period. So again, that's very positive. The supporting the view of us operating as a centre of excellence is underpinning the fact that we've done good work to date, and we would expect to go forward. So again, they're all very, very strong and positive messages that reinforce the product that we do. I think the changes you mentioned about, you know, Sir Patrick coming in and Martin coming in, but equally, you know, Katie coming in and Darren Oldhams, who's again coming in to support the road and rail side. I think what's interesting is we have had quite a challenging time for the last, I'd say, 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, but we're through that now, and we've got a pathway forward, and we've got the right people, the capability and the capacity in place to build and to start driving the agenda as opposed to responding to it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Any other comments, questions? When I read the risk narrative in the operating report, I think one of the things that strikes me is that a lot of that narrative is about existential risk, and that sort of plays to this point about you know, TfN's original role versus its role currently. How robust is that role, given the amount of uncertainty that we have politically? And it's a, I don't know whether it's a unique situation, but it's certainly not an ordinary situation to read an operating report that basically talks about, you know, the risk is that we don't have an organisation, or that nobody takes the advice. The other point about the KPIs, particularly going forward with the additional funding, I think one of my observations is that the KPIs are very activity orientated, and they're not particularly outcome orientated. So having a partnership is an activity. It's there for a reason. What are you trying to achieve as an organisation? I think there's possibly more that could be done through the KPIs to bring the value to life and bring the outcomes to life. Because if you go down the list that Tim mentioned at the beginning of that section, you can tick off all the KPIs, but you still might not have achieved what you really want to achieve, which is to influence policy and have better public transport outcomes for the people who live here. You know, that's the goal, isn't it? Anyway, just something to think about, particularly in terms of going forward. Grant, I think that's always a very useful part of the agenda. So thank you for taking us through that. I think we're now down to corporate risk review. So I presume, Daniela, that's over to you.
Yeah, morning everyone. I just wanted to update you on 3 areas today. So the first area is sort of changes to the corporate risk register since we last met, and then also the updates we've made to the risk management strategy and a schedule for a deep dive going forward. So in terms of the sort of risk environment at the moment that we currently face, we're still closely monitoring those funding risks and budget expenditure risks in relation to the fiscal environment. And also, as Paul mentioned, we've now received the funding allocation for the next 2 years and the additional amount for strengthening our role as a regional centre of excellence. With that, we have looked at sort of specific risks on the corporate risk register, such as the funding risks in line with the funding allocation. And the next sort of set of reviews will look at TfN's risk as a whole across the business in terms of the funding allocation with the inclusion of the centre of excellence, the business plan for 23-24, and obviously the updated set of KPIs as well. In terms of some of the key changes that we've made to the corporate risk register this time, I'm not going to go into detail of each bullet point, but in summary, we've closed a couple of risks which link to the organisational structure that we was going through, such as severance and data removal. Those were heightened during that period, but as we've now moved into TFN's new operating model, those risks have reduced and they're now being managed at a functional level. Also, we had a theme which was rail, and we also had a theme for co-sponsorship. Those two themes have now merged together into one, which become the rail theme, and all those risks sit together in there. And then in terms of individual risks that we've looked at, funding was a specific area. So in line with funding levels significantly reduced, in line with the funding allocation, this risk is now closed. However, we're managing future funding allocations through a sustainability risk that we have on the register. And then a number of sort of risks have also reduced in line with the review process, such as changes in government commitments due to sort of clarity within the political environment. And the STP, the endorsement of the STP refresh, this risk has reduced. It's still high due to there's a lot of activity going on with STP at the moment, but it's reduced in line with the progress being made. So there's some of the sort of key changes to the corporate risk register this time round. Obviously, the set of KPIs, they will be updated next time. In terms of the dashboard, you can obviously, something to note here is the two, you've met Katie, so the two new directors have recently joined us. So we are in the process of transferring ownership of risks and actions on the dashboard and across the risk register as a whole. To the new Rails and Rules Director and the Strategy, Policy and Comms Director. In terms of the dashboard, then at the moment we've got 10 risk themes that sit across TFN with 24 risk factors that sit within that. And the key sort of very high areas for TFN at the moment are around funding, resources, rail and the STP. And then on the summary page, you'll see the 5 risks which are driving those priorities. And the funding one is around planning assumptions that underpin medium-term sustainability are not delivered. This risk we've done some articulation to since we've received the funding allocation. The second one's around TFN unable to recruit and retain suitable staff. The third one's around TFN having a reduced role in rail industry. And then obviously TFN being unable to produce a draft STP that will be endorsed by the TFN board and government in time to consult and then adopt the plans by the end of 2023. So that's the main sort of changes to the corporate risk register since we last met. Has anyone got any questions on that before we move on?
Could I perhaps highlight one point that Daniela just raised then? The interesting point about resources. You know, we're effectively a people business. You know, we're a strategic consultancy, and I think we can recruit people. The interesting challenge is how do we retain people? But I think also we've got to accept, and I think we do, is that we're a very high-profile organisation, and the individuals who are delivering the services become high-profile themselves. So I think we are acknowledging the fact that you know, we could lose people, and we are likely to lose people, and that's going to be part of our normal course of business, and we've already had that today. So I think the challenge from us is to create a continued exciting environment for the individuals to prosper, but accepting the fact that being relatively small, it's going to be a challenge to keep people for as long as we want. And so I think we're going to face a fairly cyclical rotation of staff, I would suspect. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened.
Yeah, I know, Kevin, just before you raise a point, I think just on that specific comment, Paul, around retention.
Yeah.
I think there is a measure buried in the operating report towards the back end, which is turnover.
Yeah.
I did read it, and it's about 30-odd%, and I did wonder how much value that KPI that measure is actually giving you, because it isn't the turnover that's important. It's turnovers of specific roles that's probably much more important to you, and roles that are going to be there going forward rather than roles that no longer exist. So there's probably more you can draw out of that HR data than more value that you can draw out of that HR data, perhaps.
And I think it'll be. I think once it settles down, we've had that the transitional year last year. We've now got we're proposing going forward that we wouldn't be making. I think we might be proposing one very small adjustment to the establishment as a result of the NPR Thames service, but other than that, everything would be staying the same. Parking Centre of Excellence. So it is about saying that we've got the establishment right, and then you're into a pure turnover figure really, because it's varying against a base that you would that we all recognise. But your point, a good point taken, Graham.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, I had a couple of sort of questions really on the risk register, but just picking up on the staffing issue. I mean, it seems to me highly relevant that we've got this lined up as a deep dive, I think, for June, looking at all of that. I shared Graham's concern around I think it was 30.5% staff turnover, which is extraordinarily high, it seems to me, comparatively, when looking across the public sector generally. So I think it'd be useful to sort of get behind some of that in June if we can. And perhaps, Paul, I just wonder whether you've done any work around staff surveys or sort of exit interview data that might be helpful to us when we look at that in June. So that's just a sort of an observation, I guess. But in terms of specificity around the register, I can understand the reduction in some of the probability scores to some degree, but just would challenge around the ones around TCR02 in terms of that being based on clarity within the current political environment. I'm glad that somebody's got some clarity around the political environment, because I've never seen anything quite as disruptive as what we've seen for the last couple of years. So I guess a bit of a challenge around that, especially when I set that against some of the other risks that we've got in there, where we're saying, we've got uncertainty around how Transport for the North will juxtapose against Great British Railway going forward, and then we've got funding flagged as a red, and yet we're sort of saying, well, we're more comfortable now with our funding allocation. So I'm assuming perhaps that TCR 13 funding red score is more about uncertainty for capital and other project funding as distinct from core funding. So it'd be helpful to sort of just understand that a little bit more forensically, I guess, if you can, Daniela.
Yeah, so I think, Kevin, with the political environment one, it is still obviously, but I think at the time when I think it was increased around the time when everything happened with Liz Truss and and the emerging environment that it was setting then. Whereas obviously now we've got a new sort of Prime Minister in place, and we've also received the 2-year sort of funding allocation as well, which is sort of I think the impacts. The important thing to note with this risk is, although the probability has reduced in line with what it was before, prior to what was going on, the impacts are still the same if the risk was to occur. Yeah. So that's an important thing to note, and I think. In relation to the question around the reason the funding risk is still red overall is around the sustainability issue that Paul mentioned before. So even though we're in a good place in terms of, it's great news about getting the 2-year sort of funding allocation and the inclusion of the Centre of Excellence, we're still sort of we've still got that in mind, bearing in mind the sustainability issues that we have for sort of future years, really.
Okay, thanks for that, Daniel. That's clarified. I'm comfortable with that. I think but there's also, I think, on the political sort of horizon scanning side, that we need to start to sort of factor in what happens towards the end of 2024. So there might be some certainty at the moment.
It's definitely It's definitely a risk, Kevin, that's constantly being monitored, and at the moment it's constantly changing as well. Based on what's going on, it could, depending what happens in a month's time, that one could change again, and that's the good thing about the risk register, and it's constant, forever evolving.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
Okay, we're happy to move on to the updates to the risk management strategy. Sorry, Keith.
Can I just mention a couple of, Kevin mentioned about the turnover, and I think again the turnover reflects the fact in the different role that county council, for God's sake, that TFN has been operating on over this last 18 months or so. Obviously, and again, I'm not sure that we're going to get any further capital funding, Paul. We're not doing that kind of work, really, are we? As correct. You said, no, we're an advisory and sitting alongside British Rail as an advisory board. So, but again, I think now that we've got a sort of more settled position and people in place, I think the turnover will. It's always there. People have got a chance to go if they need to go, if other opportunities arise. But I think through what we're seeing in Wales at the moment, with road infrastructure being withdrawn and stopped, and the financial situation nationally, it's not a good place to be in at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Just before we dive into the next bit, I'm just conscious, David, or anybody else, if you have any comments about the risk register, just dive in. Just building on Kevin's challenge, which I was going to offer myself if Kevin hadn't. I think if you look across the narrative that you've got within the risk register, it's one of reducing risk, because there's a list of risks that are being reduced for whatever reason. It doesn't matter what they are. The narrative is one of risk reduction, and that ends up being the assurance picture that you're painting for the board. And I think Kevin's challenge is spot on, because I struggle to see the external risk landscape that you operate in as being one defined by reducing uncertainty. I don't think it is. So I'm not saying you've got the risk assessment incorrect. I think there is a question that you can preempt and help the board answer, which is, we're describing a basket full of risks here for you under the heading of generally reducing risk within what is still an incredibly uncertain external risk landscape. And there is a conflict, there's a potential conflict between those two pictures, and I think you could help the board by sort of preempting some of the things that Kevin says, some of the things that I'm talking about, helping them to answer some of those challenges. Because if you think about the political landscape, we're on our third prime minister in 12 months. Yeah, that's none of us have experienced anything like that, I don't think. So I think you've got to be very careful about presenting a picture of reducing risk, given that as your political landscape. Again, I'm not saying you've got it wrong. It's just that more strategic external perspective on the register perhaps might help.
Sorry, point taken, Graham, and we'll think about that. I think what's interesting is that high level read, and that's, as you say, that's what the board will take. So yeah, we'll just reflect on what you've said.
David.
I just wanted to say, I mean, we're sort of being somewhat reflective today, and I think sort of I was thinking, as Danielle was going through there, I was thinking about like the evolution of the risk register for TFN over the last, what is it, almost 5 years. been on this board, and I have been really impressed with Daniela, her colleagues now, and her predecessors, and how I think you touched on there, Graham, like the ever-changing external environment that you're trying to identify and mitigate for, and how that's been incorporated in the register and in a realistic and sort of tempered way. And so I just really wanted to say I said my main thing at the university before I joined this committee was that I used to sit on the risk committee of the university, which, you know, we thought was a volatile environment at the time, going through the changes in AG, but it was nothing compared to what's happened in the last 5 years to the environment for TFN. And so I just really wanted to say I've been really impressed with it. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Right, Daniela, back to you, I think.
Yeah, so moving on to, in terms of update to the risk management strategy, so one of the actions that came out of the RSM risk maturity review was to include the factors that are to be considered when escalating risks to operating board. It's important to note that these things were done previous. It's just now they've sort of been documented within the risk management strategy. And the three areas where we consider risk are around risks that prevent impacts on the achievement of our overall strategic objectives, risk that adversely affects business critical activities or business plan delivery, which cannot be managed or controlled at a project, programme or functional level. And then also risks that may affect multiple projects, programmes or functions and require sort of a collaboration across teams, really. So they're the sort of three sort of areas that have been included now within the strategy for escalating risk to operating board. Guess, has anyone got any questions on that? No? Okay. Brilliant. So the next thing is the deep dive schedule. So we had a deep dive in November for EVCI. So we put together a plan for the next year in terms of areas that we will sort of intend to deep dive on as part of Audit and Governance Committee. I think there's two things that are important to know about this. It's obviously a relatively new process that we're putting in. So as we go into the process, it may be we decide to change elements of it, or as we're going through these deep dives. And I think the other thing is, even though we've got sort of 4 bullets there in terms of what we're going to look at, those things could change, and that's dependent on if the risk that we're looking at is still red, or it's also dependent on, is there anything more priority in terms of industry specific areas that we'd want to look at instead of those. So I think the first one that we plan to look at in, apologies, it should be July 23, is a red corporate risk at the moment, and it feels very relevant and real in terms of recruitment and retention of staff, which is one of the reasons we've picked that one. I think the second one we've picked to look at is a recommendation from Graham from the last Audit and Governance Committee meeting that we had, and that's around fraud and what risks TFN have around fraud at the moment. And then we've got December 23, we'll look at sort of TFN could have a reduced role in rail industry. And then February 24, the risks are associated with the Centre of Excellence. So, you know, appreciate it's a year plan and it could change, but that's sort of what we're looking at the moment. Has anyone got any comments on that?
Kevin, go ahead.
Not particularly strong view, really, but it seems to me that certainly the June deep dive as proposed would strike me as being a priority. I think there's an argument to swap the fraud with the Great British Railway discussion. I think that'd be more pertinent, perhaps, in the next 6 months to have that sort of deep dive and get a better understanding, really, of the drivers, etc. there. Just thinking about fraud, Graham, I think, you know, given that we don't see anything really concerning around internal whistleblowing or even for that matter external that I can recall, and no incidences of fraud have been brought to this committee's attention that I'm aware of. I just wonder whether we could slip that to the back end of this and bring the Centre of Excellence forward as well, because that is something that we have discussed a number of times in this committee, particularly around that sort of sustainability and capacity building around that Centre of Excellence. And given that we've got the conversation around staffing capacity as well, then there seems to me to be a natural sort of flow there from that. So I suppose that would be my view. It would be to slip fraud to the back end of this timetable. But it's not something I'll be dying in a ditch over.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with fraud, well, there are two challenges. One, as a committee, we have a specific obligation to provide oversight on the strategy. I'm not convinced that we've necessarily done that as well as we could have done in the past. So I'm keen that the committee covers it in some way. It doesn't have to be in a deep dive. I think the other point is that just because there isn't any immediate evidence or recent historical evidence of fraudulent activity that we're aware of doesn't mean that there hasn't been. And it is one of those risks that if it does materialise, it could cause significant damage to the organisation's reputation and its ability to influence government. So, it isn't something that I would get overly excited about, Kevin. Because I don't think it has to be a deep dive, but I am keen that we cover it in the coming calendar year, because it's just whilst we're on the topic of deep dive, and just before anybody else says it, I really enjoyed the deep dive that we had last time. I know Paul and I have reflected briefly on it, and it didn't necessarily go the way that people expected it to go. But I thought it was a really informative session. People were really engaged. I think everybody had a better understanding of the risks associated with infrastructure at the end of the conversation than at the beginning of the conversation. From that perspective, I think it was really helpful. So I'm looking forward to the next one, I think. I didn't know if anybody else had any comments on the schedule. Okay, back to you, Daniela. Thank you.
I think that's it from me, really. I mean, would you like me to sort of change the order of the suggestions that we've got there, or should we?
Maybe if I could just pitch in here, I think to me the deep dive schedule that we've talked about is fluid, and that's so it's a bit like the internal audit side, is that we've with that plan we move things around when the plan was devised in February, and then we actually moved it round in year. Yeah. So I'm pretty comfortable we move things around. I think I'm just reflecting on what's been said. I'm just wondering whether we could pick up anti-fraud or fraud through the annual governance review as more of a sort of as opposed to being a risk review of fraud. It's more about here's the policy, here's our compliance, because that's part of an annual governance review anyway. So that would sit well there. In terms of Centre of Excellence, I think certainly the emerging rail reform is it's a big issue and a big topic. Whether it's sufficiently progressed by June or by September, I don't know. But generally, we were thinking of the Centre of Excellence was to give ourselves a year and demonstrate the output. And that be something that we bring back. Now, again, whether that's done through deep dive and risk or whether it's done through a different methodology, it doesn't matter. But so I think that's what so in my mind, fraud we can pick up through AGS, and then in terms of moving the other two round, I'm more than comfortable to do that if that's what the committee want.
Graham, it's just Keith again. I would support Kevin in his ask for the Centre of Excellence. I think that's potentially where there's a lot of work that needs to be done and can be done, but it's something that the whole of the North transport authorities are very keen on and very supportive of. So it's a big piece for us. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I think maybe. Sorry, Emma, go ahead.
It was just to say, yeah, I've been making a note to Paul that I thought the fraud and anti-fraud sits very well within the AGS.
Yeah.
As you know, showing the mechanisms that we employ on that front. So definitely think that should sit there. If it's duplication, that's fine, but I think it definitely should be something that we haven't picked up in enough detail in the past, maybe.
I think if we carve out some time in July on the agenda specifically to go through it, I think that would encourage us to give it its due attention.
The interesting thing on Centre of Excellence, which is, and again, I don't have the answer to this as we speak, but what we're endeavouring to do, because it's £750,000 of their activity. And Tim and I and Martin have spoken, and Casey have spoken at length about this in terms of trying to position that as business as usual. So, embedded in activities, so people are delivering core duties, and they're also at the same time delivering centre of excellence. And there's no distinction between the two. So we're kind of badging it because it's new and it's almost a sort of an isolated. It looks as though it stands alone. But in reality, it won't, and it can't at these levels. I think if it was a couple of £1 million or £4 or £5 million, it becomes a very different animal then. But right now, it's just it's almost an extension of in-year funding. It's twice as much as what it was in the previous year, and so it's in its infancy, and how it's going to work and exactly how it pans out will be developed during the year. So I think something around the back end of the year around Centre of Excellence is good. If we call it deep dive around risk, well, perhaps we badge it as that, but maybe it's more about how's it being delivered operationally or something. That's going to be the focus, I suspect. Don't know if you'd like to add anything, Tim. Perhaps. Right. Perhaps not.
I think the other point in terms of Centre of Excellence, of course, is that it's on the forward audit schedule for 24-25. When I read that, one of my immediate questions is, can it wait until 24-25, given that we've got this significant increase in spend and emphasis? So I think there's probably an interplay between whether we call it a deep dive or not, as to what we think was needed from an assurance point of view, and how that feeds into the internal audit schedule. Perhaps we can just make sure we look at the things together. I guess.
Yeah.
Katie, over to you.
I know Tim's having some broadband issues this morning, so just to come back on that point, Paul, I think the end of the year sounds about right to me. The Centre of Excellence is part of our BAU. It's what we're doing, but I think it's how we badge it, how we package it, and actually how we prioritise and engage with our partners on it. It's a limited amount of money. So actually getting the governance and understanding how we can best support LTAs, how we can work with other STBs is fundamental. And that's work that's ongoing. Now we've got the letter to say we've got the money, and we've got an outline in the letter of the things that needs to look at. I'm going to be working with Tim and with Tame colleagues just over the coming weeks to shape that. So I think the chance to come to this committee, and whether we call it a deep dive, as you say, Chair, or another title for it, I think to have your view on how it's coming together, how it's looking and how it's operating would be really helpful. And then perhaps looking that slightly further ahead. In the past, when I've set up new functions or augmented functions that we've got in to create a new offer, I think looking at a year 2 kind of audit would be quite helpful. So I think a deep dive this year and an audit in 24-25 sounds quite reasonable. But happy to keep that under review as the committee sees appropriate. Thank you.
Chair, Alex has put something in the chat with regards to risk, and deep dives can look at opportunities as well as the risks.
Yeah, I beat you to it. I read it. Yes, no, it's quite right. I mean, yes, it isn't necessarily a threat orientated view of the world. It's an opportunity orientated view as well, which is very much centre of excellence. Yeah, I think the other from a strategic objectives point of view, I think there's probably a bit of a disconnect between the amount of funding and its strategic significance.
Yes.
So you know that alone, that thought sort of elevates it from an area of interest, because you know it doesn't matter what you're funded for, but if you're known as something, then that's probably where the emphasis is. Well, that was probably more discussion, Daniela, than you'd anticipated on deep dive schedule.
No, it was a good conversation, yeah. But thanks everyone. That's it from me. Unless anyone's got anything else or any other questions.
Grant, thank you. I think on treasury management next, Paul.
Sorry, Graham, you broke up there. Is that were you
treasury management next? Sorry.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's more of an item that I think we have to bring in front of you, and than necessarily its content. What I talked about previously, obviously the reduction of post IRP with the MPR programme back to the department, then budgets changed from being 60 to 70 million to being about somewhere between 10 and 20 million, subject to MPR tame. So the level and complexity associated to treasury management needs to change commensurately. We've and also back into the sustainability discussion before, the level of reserves are dropping more towards the, in the next 2 to 3 years are projected to drop more towards the minimum levels that we would operate in. So generally our cash balances are relatively are significantly lower. So what I thought about at the time was to significantly simplify the strategy. But then I thought, what I should just do is just remove the unnecessary areas, but retain its capability to deal with, to be a strategy that could develop with the future if we were to grow. So what I've just done is just taken out. There's a whole raft of stuff around, economic analysis, and I mean, whilst it's quite interesting to know what's going on in the Japanese economy, I'm not sure it necessarily influences too much what goes on in the UK economy. And really, from a treasury perspective, we're interested in the UK interest rates. So we've taken a lot of that, taken a fair chunk of the economic activity out, and just focused on the key indicators and key drivers that we think are relevant. The essential message is still the same, is that we focus on security, liquidity, and then yield. So we're not out there taking risks to try and squeeze an extra pound out of the yield, because we can't afford to have risk, because we have activities that are underpinned by grant. If we were to lose something because of speculation, we would then lose activity. So it's not a strategy that we pursue. So but on the other side is, every cloud, I suppose, with interest rates going up and up and up. For once now, we're faced with the potential to drive out some reasonable yield, albeit our cash balances have slowly reduced. So that's it really. It's more to, I suppose, just positioning the changes. It's fit for future going forward. If we were to stay as we are, or even to gradually increase. And that's it really. But equally happy to take any questions regard to it or its content or changes.
Thanks, Paul. I saw the word calibrate buried within it, and for me that's a really good word. I think it's a good way of describing the exercise, which is to recalibrate the approach rather than to necessarily change anything, to make, as you said, fit for purpose is the other way of describing it. So, I'm assuming that there's no material increase in exposure or decrease in exposure. It's just a slightly different emphasis given a slightly smaller pot. I think that's.
There's no change in risk or exposure. It's exactly the same. So the investment strategy, if anything, actually, it'll be probably tighter, because we will disperse the cash in smaller pots. So it's arguably a lower risk environment going forward.
Any other questions for Paul on that? Are you happy? Internal audit, Alex.
Thank you very much. So the first of the papers just to present to you today is our progress paper, and I'll just pull out the key points and take it as read. Clearly, we've got one report that's been finalised for the papers today, which I'll take you through. And we've got one report that's been finalised since obviously the papers have been submitted. That's in regards to ED&I, and one report which is in regards to PMO, which is in draft at this stage. So we're just seeking responses to that report. But in terms of completion of the audit plan, we're at a stage where all the fieldwork's been complete. We're just closing down those final reports, and they will come to the next meeting for your consideration. But I'll pause that stage. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has anything in regards to our progress to date. No? Okay. You're happy for me to move on to the final report for GDPR? Okay. So yeah, thank you. Thank you. So this is the final report for General Data Protection Regulation Governance Framework. This is undertaken by our subject matter experts in this field, and is an advisory review in regards to the overarching framework. There are 4 actions that we've proposed in our report. One is around the ROPA, which is your record of processing activities. There is a template, and there's work to be undertaken in terms of recording the activities that are undertaken and incorporating access by third parties as well. There's an action in regards to refreshing training. So obviously when people are inducted into the organisation, they receive training in regards to GDPR, but looking obviously to make sure that actually existing staff have that refresher training and reminder in regards to the requirements. The other 2 areas, one is around updating the policy in regards to roles and responsibilities, and it does link into the 4th action that we've proposed, which is around training for the new data protection officer. So I think it's just to give some context in regards to this review. There has been transition between individuals in terms of this area, and we envisage now with these actions to take forward. Obviously there is a new DPO in place, and we envisage that person then to take forward these actions, which I think were in progress but needed further attention at the time when we undertook the review. Obviously it'll come through committee in terms of completion of these actions at a later stage to make sure that they're obviously embedded. But I'll pause. I'm happy to take any questions at this stage or any comments that you may have. Thank you.
Hi, it's just Emma Young here, just from the legal team, just to say those things are underway. So we've got Gavin Legg now as he's registered with ICO as the official data protection officer, and I've got I'm about to today or Monday sending off. We'll be looking forward to this, Paul, and others in departments to get some details to start compiling proper ROPAs. So all contracts with third-party processing of personal data. So just to say those things are underway for the committee's purposes, and hopefully we will fulfil them by the 31st of March, which is the deadline for completion.
Kevin, thank you. Emma, thank you.
Yeah. I suppose I accept that this is an advisory report, but nonetheless it read quite alarmingly, really, in terms of the lack of assurance that we gained from this in terms of handling of GDPR really across the organisation. So there's a series of sort of weaknesses there, and I guess some of that might be due to the turnover and lack of staff capacity, etc. But nonetheless, it read quite concerningly, I think. Took some assurance from the management actions and the timelines there, which are pretty tight. So it looks as though we should be getting ourselves into some better shape by the end of March, April. But I think it is something that we need to just get that reassurance back here sooner rather than later, I think, rather than waiting for a sort of a follow-up report, later in the year. Because there seemed to me, I don't want to be alarmist, but there did seem to be a fair number of fronts on which we were fairly badly exposed. Notwithstanding that to date we don't seem to have had data breaches, but I'm not convinced that the lack of sort of policy and control processes would give us the assurance that we haven't had data breach. It's just that we've not been aware of them. So just, and ditto with our handling of subject access requests. We're being told that we haven't had any, which seems unusual, but perhaps again maybe reflective of the nature of this organisation. But elsewhere, where I sit in similar committees, that you would expect to see, a number of subject access requests, within each quarter. But that may be, as I say, it may be reflective of the organisation. So I suppose, in summary, concern, but some assurance around the management actions. But we just I think we need to tick those off at some point, Chair, in the near future, rather than waiting too long in terms of a follow-up report from the auditors.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think this is probably a good example of how the relationship between audit and risk can really add value to committee and to board in terms of providing that visibility, because I think what the audit has effectively done is highlighted in it. You use the word exposure, Kevin, which I think is exactly the right word. It's highlighted an area of exposure that wasn't necessarily reflected on the risk register prior to the audit. And there is even if all of these management actions are delivered within the timescale, some of that exposure is still there. And that's a slightly unusual situation, but it's one that we ought to recognise, I think, within the risk narrative, that things may have happened. We may have been non-compliant from an ICO perspective. We may not have been compliant with legislation prior to the audit and up to the point at which the management actions are complete. So, there is an element of exposure there as well. So yeah, I think it's. I think I agree, Kevin. I think an update, either offline or certainly at the July committee meeting on management actions, would be helpful. I don't know whether, Alex, you've included anything within the body of the report in terms of any sort of residual exposure, or whether what is the likelihood of ICO interest in organisations such as TF? It's that kind of perspective.
No, I mean that's always appreciate all your comments that have been made, and I think that's always a question you get asked, is that exposure in terms of any potential breaches, like you said, is if anything comes through that has to be reported to the ICO. What the framework does is to really give you an understanding, though, of where your data is and what's flowing and where it flows to, and that is really important. And the training as well for individuals to, the awareness, I think, is really important. I don't think you could really, I guess, Graham, is quantify what impact from an ICO perspective it would have if you had a particular breach. But what it would do is, obviously, if you've got your ROPA in place and you've got all your framework in place, it does demonstrate you're capturing the information, or where that information is held. So it shows that you're demonstrating you have got that control mechanism in place. Clearly, breaches do happen, and it's then the mechanisms you've got in place to investigate them, how you report them. So actually having that function and mechanism in place clearly does obviously demonstrate to the ICO. Obviously, from a financial perspective, it's not just the financial element now. They do obviously report on the publicly as well, even if there isn't a fine in regards to that. So in terms of ROPA, I think it is, you know, in some organisations, I think it's fair to say there are a number that are still working through such documents and documenting things, albeit that actually GDPR has been in place for several years now. There's still that element. And obviously, Kevin, you said about subject access requests. Yes, we do see a lot across different organisations, different sectors. You see them on a periodic basis and the responses, but like you said, it could be the nature of the organisation where you don't obviously have that level coming through from that perspective. So hopefully that gives you some context.
Sorry, Emma.
It was just to come back on in terms of the access requests for personal data, because we're not hugely personal data heavy. That they're more limited, but we do come into contact with the ICO a lot in terms of FOIA and environmental information requests. So as an organisation, we get a lot of requests for information and data, but it tends to be on that side, given what we're producing, and we do deal with those very expediently and are very aware of the procedures and what we have to do in order to comply with that side of things. So it's not the same as this audit at all, but I wouldn't want you to think that we don't take information law generally very seriously, because we do internally.
Thanks, Emma. And I think the point you made, Alex, about awareness, because if folk don't understand what personal data looks like, can't necessarily expect to do anything with it, which is the whole purpose of the regulation. So it's that underpinning of people having appreciation of what personal data, or what constitutes personal data, and how it can be protected, and the rights of people. It's really, really important. And I think there is I know we'll talk about governance statement again later on. I think there's also a connection between this piece of work and the governance statement, thinking about fraud, thinking about conduct, thinking about ethics. You can't divorce GDPR from ethics. You can't divorce it from conduct, and you can't divorce it from fraud policy and compliance with that. So there is in terms of evidencing corporate governance statement, I think the fact that we've done this audit, the fact that we've done these actions, or we're doing these actions, I think that's part of providing that assurance story, which I think is really important. Paul.
Yeah. So I was just looking at the diary and the schedule going forward. So there's a meeting scheduled in late July, but just looking at the actions that have been captured within the report, the majority were March designated. There was one for April, and if we haven't, I wouldn't propose that we wait until the end of April to say whether we've done something or not. If we're able to demonstrate substantial progress, that would give a level of assurance of our ability to hit an April deadline. So I'll talk to Julie outside the meeting and request an update is given in this area to hopefully give members the assurance that they think is needed, or they believe is needed in this area, and that it doesn't, because again, I suppose it's that I'm assuming that a positive message will be given in sort of mid to late April, as opposed to anything other than that. But if it was to be anything other than that, clearly I think you'd want to know that you're not getting the assurance. So an update fed back, probably just distributed to members, as an update report. We'll find some way of doing that, and then it can form the basis of feeding information back to Alex and the team from an internal audit perspective.
That's great, thank you, Paul. I think just to echo some of the points that Kevin made earlier, I think the breadth of the audit is a really positive thing, and I think from a management action point of view, the fact that you said most of them are due for completion by March, hopefully that's still realistic, but that demonstrates a certain level of commitment, which I think you should be applauded for that. Is that everything on that particular audit report. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you very much. So we are forward looking now for your 23-24 audit plan. And just to set the scene in terms of the plan that we're proposing, within the paper you have the audits that we're proposing for 2023. You'll see that we've included within each area the relevant risk linked to that particular area. So obviously linking in with the paper that you've received from Daniela, the approach that we're undertaking and proposed timing. And then what you have within the remainder of the paper at Appendix B is our strategy. So again, you can see the journey in regards to those particular audit areas where we've provided assurance, whether it's a positive journey in regards to that. So again, we continue to build that history of those audit areas that we've reviewed. And then within the back of the paper, we include our internal audit charter, which sets out our roles and responsibilities. But in terms of the main focus for today is really to seek approval from the committee that you're comfortable with the audit areas that have been proposed for 23-24, recognising obviously what was recorded earlier in the meeting by Paul and wider, that this is a flexible plan. And I think that's really important to reflect that within the discussions, that actually if your risk profile changes in particular areas, there's an opportunity to revisit which audits are focused on, whether that be the Centre of Excellence by way of example, or any other areas, or emerging risks from that side. I'm not proposing to go through every audit area. There's a high level scope against each audit area. Clearly, again, that will be something that we'll work with individuals and key sponsors to define and build a suitable scope to take forward. The subject matter experts will be incorporated where appropriate, so around security review, for example, but very much to seek your views on the areas where you think that is reflective of your needs, think about your risk register and any wider assurances you receive at this point in time. I'll pause. I'm happy to take any questions, any thoughts that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Over to members. Kevin.
Yeah, I think generally I'm comfortable with the programme as outlined. Seems to be a sensible set of issues. The staff mental health and wellbeing would flow, I think, from our June deep dive, if we're calling it a deep dive, and we can feed any issues that particularly come from that into that audit review. I guess the one that might be a bit of a challenge really would be value for money, in that, as the organisation has shifted quite significantly now, I just wonder whether any whether the value for money framework is going to be fit for a new purpose. So is there any work that we might need to do in advance to sort of preempt, so they're being told that it's not fit for purpose, which wouldn't really, move us forward, I wouldn't have thought. So I suppose just a question mark around that, because if we're now not delivering capital programmes going forward, then I'm just wondering how fit for purpose the existing framework is.
I think there's potentially the other side of that coin, Kevin. Maybe is it relevant enough to warrant an audit, given the changes that have happened across the organisation, given the exposure that it has across external audit reporting. That was so. I think VFM was probably on both of our lists, but maybe for slightly different reasons. I'd be interested to understand what the marginal benefit of having an internal audit at this stage, given what we have elsewhere. That would be a good point for consideration, I think.
wasn't sure.
Other than that, I didn't have any particular comments on the plan.
I think
other than the point I mentioned earlier about centre of excellence, I think whatever we do, in order to be a centre of excellence, we need to be excellent in something, and as long as we tease that out somehow, either internally or through an audit, that's. Sorry, Paul.
I think in terms of the specifics as to whether, I think in the process of, this is a very high level plan. It's just giving an indicative view. I think once we get to the level below that and start to work up a programme, I think that will probably establish whether it is marginal or not. And I think if it turns out to be relatively marginal, then yes, we're comfortable to move it. I think there is a piece though around about there are some interesting value for money decisions that we need to make as a business, and we need to do them now because money's tight, and well, it always has been tight, but so I think value for money still has a piece, despite the fact that we don't have capital programs, but its extent and how deep it goes is a question. But I think with a lot of things is we almost need assurance that things are working well. We're not looking for I suppose areas where we haven't achieved value for money. We're almost looking for a demonstration that we have. But equally, I think dovetailing into the work with Mazars on the external side will be quite useful, because there's assurance can be gained from that side as well. So just understanding how the two fit together would be quite useful. So happy to do that as a piece of work behind the scenes, and then we can pick that up in July if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
I think just one further point to make, and perhaps members aren't aware, but we've asked RSM to stay with us for 23, 24. The main driver for that, from my perspective, was about continuity. And it's back to that original point that I made. There's an interesting trade-off here between value for money, transparency, procurement, but also continuity and efficiency. So we RSM are able to have been part of the process, and you can see that they've been there since 2018-19. There's a system that's recognised and understood by all members, and I believe we're very comfortable with it. So that was one of the reasons why we chose to extend the services for one more year. We probably will consider reprocurement in the next 6 months. But I'm sure if RSM are successful, we would be delighted with them being a partner with us going forward because of that. Back to that point about continuity. But again, it's value for money probably dictates the fact that we have to go out to the external market to at least test the market. But we have frameworks that, so it's not a done deal, Alex. I think we've got to look at the frameworks as well and see whether there's a scope for us to achieve value for money within frameworks as well. So that was just a bit of an update in terms of, I suppose, the provision of the service.
I think just picking up on the word continuity, but from an audit perspective, I think business continuity is something that's scheduled currently for 24-25. I think that for me was probably the one candidate that I would have highlighted as something that could be brought forward. I think it is, from a business continuity point of view, I think it's time we move the debate on from the pandemic happened, we were okay because we all worked from home. I think we need to move on from that. And with the personnel changes that we've had across the organisation and its different focus, we only have to look at suspension of services in Royal Mail to understand how continuity can be a significant issue for organisations who are not necessarily across it. So that was just to flag a particular interest in that. Grand, thanks, Alex. I think we're okay with that. Was that everything, Alex? Sorry.
That is, thank you. No, that's been really useful, and we'll take forward the discussions in regards to those areas and make sure that we are focusing the right areas that are going to add value. So business continuity will take forward for the discussions as well. Thank you for your comments.
Great. Thanks, Alex. External audit, Karen.
Thank you, Graham. So you've got two papers from us today, and I'm probably going to cover them all in one kind of spiel, really. So the first paper that you've got from us is our auditor's annual report. It summarises all of the work that we've done for the year, and this is really the first opportunity we've had to bring this to you. This report is important in the sense that it goes onto your website as well, and it then becomes the kind of document that anyone who wants to know what your external auditor thought of you for the year can look at and see that. So in that context, it covers our work on the accounts and our work on value for money, which I'll pick up momentarily. We talked at the last meeting about where we were in terms of the accounts audit, and we said to you at the time that we were more or less finished. The issue that we were still kind of wrestling with, if you like, was the pensions assurance. So the second of the papers on here just updates you on where we were, where we got to by the 29th of November in terms of those pensions issues. There were a couple of errors, if you like, that arose as a result of timing differences between the information that's provided to you and that which is then in the pension fund annual accounts. That's part of the reason why we need to wait a while. I think it's probably important that everyone on committee understands that you closed the accounts down based on the information that you had. That was the right thing to do. This is about kind of timing on the pension fund side, really, and around the valuation of those assets and their assets and therefore liabilities. We've probably seen a little more volatility this year than we usually see as a result of, and I don't really want to go into too much detail on this, but I think it reflects the holding that Greater Manchester Pension Fund has in assets that were impacted by the Ukraine conflict, as opposed to the pension fund just holding kind of very bog standard stocks and shares. So their assets became more valuable once there was pressure in the energy market, as it were. So we issued our audit opinion on the 29th of November on your financial statements. That is a very positive statement. So, members of committee will have heard me say before, unqualified is what you want. It means your accounts were free from material error. And just to reiterate points made previously, really, your audit was a good process from our. Sorry, have I just gone on to mute? Sorry, I was leaning on my piece of paper. Your accounts were prepared to a good standard. And we were able to do our audit with the full support of your team in a way that was both efficient and effective. So thank you again to your team for that. In terms of VFM, and just kind of picking up really on the debate you've just had, we're required to provide a commentary around your arrangements for value for money. And I think it's important to understand that we are looking at your arrangements, the arrangements you have in place to get it right, as opposed to whether or not you do get it right. So it's not about the outcomes, it's about the kind of arrangements in place that underpin what you do. We're required to look at 3 specific things by the National Audit Office Code. So that's how you plan and ensure your financial sustainability. It's what your arrangements are for governance and decision making, and then it's the activities that you undertake to do what you can to improve economy, efficiency and effectiveness in outputs. Now, it's difficult, as I said, because we don't particularly look at the output, the outcome. We are concentrating on how you get to where you get to. We identified one risk in respect of your arrangements, and that was around the financial sustainability agenda. And I think we've had a good discussion about this previously. For me, this is about the fact that you do have a reduction to your core funding. There was a change in the arrangements and the status of MPR in particular. So you needed to take some action to address the impact of that on your operating model. And I guess really when you read the commentary that we've made, you will see that we're focused on recognising that you have a problem, that you know you've got a problem, you understand the scale of it, you know that you can't continue to rely on your reserves to provide you with the gap funding, if you like, between the grants that you get in now and what your operations are costing. And you know that you need to bring your cost base back in line with your funding, and you've got plans in place to do it. I think what we're pleased to see is that based on the work that we've done, you have got a plan, you've done some modelling. There is evidence that you do understand the pressure, you understand the risks and the uncertainties in the plans that you are putting in place. And there is evidence that budget holders across the organisation are engaged in and understand their responsibilities to help. I'm pleased that in a lot of the reports that you issue, Paul is clear. He's very explicit about the need to maintain a general fund balance at a minimum level, and he's very clear in his reports about the fact that, you know, not only is that important, but it is kept under review. So I think we've reported back to you here that we can see how you're linking what you need to do operationally with the financial pressure that you're under. And in that context, reporting through from kind of what happens operationally to board and to members through different working groups is very clear. In terms of your governance and decision making, I think what, you know, on the positive side, what we're saying there is you have in place what is expected. So you've got the constitution, the policies and the procedures that underpin it. We can see evidence that the right reports are going to the right place to support decision making. Your reports are clear. There is good evidence of good debate in meetings. You know, you've had a good debate here this morning around a number of things, and that's a positive thing. There is definitely a risk management process in place that is reported through, and we see evidence of financial scrutiny and challenge going through. So I think overall we're satisfied that there are no weaknesses in the arrangements by which TFN makes its decisions. And then on the 3 E's, relatively the economy, efficiency and effectiveness point, really, relatively a brief section, but I think from my perspective, you do have performance information, you do monitor it, it covers the KPIs, it covers a broader range of other metrics that you know are important. It's quite a broad spectrum, and we haven't identified any weaknesses in what you do there. And similarly, and I guess probably more extreme than we see in a lot of places, really, if you were not doing partnership working well, I think you would know about it because you're involved with so many different groups, so many different stakeholders. So you do have arrangements in place to make sure that you're represented in the right places, you're sending the right people to those meetings. And generally speaking, you know, we didn't have any recommendations to make. So I think that's as positive a report as you can have, if you like, in the context of the responsibility we've got to comment on your arrangements. And I hope that's helpful. I suspect going forward, we will continue to identify financial sustainability as an issue because it's something where if we don't see the action coming through quickly enough, we'll know the arrangements don't work, and we'll continue to flag that for you. But that's really all I was going to say. I'm happy to kind of take any questions or whatever from there. I wasn't going to talk any more about the audit completion letter that came out alongside the opinion being signed. I've referenced the pensions adjustments, and I think that's really all there was in there of any significance.
Grand. Thank you, Karen. Very helpful as always. Yeah, I guess in terms of an oversight opportunity rather than an obligation, it's how, if at all, does TFN call upon your expertise and insight during the course of the year? This is obviously an annual exercise. You know, given the significance of financial sustainability as an existential threat to the organisation, you know, is there more that needs to be done? Do you think in that space to draw on your expertise and insight?
Yeah, I take your point that it's a once-a-year reporting requirement from us that we're in. I guess that's because we haven't got a lot to say in between, but it would be wrong to think that we're not keeping an eye on that through the course of the year. So Campbell and the team do have regular conversations with Paul about how things are looking from a financial planning perspective, what's happening in terms of delivering budgets, savings plans, and so on. And actually, if at any stage we think that's going off track, we'll intervene and we'll issue we'll tell you we think we've now got a significant weakness, and if we need to, we'll issue a recommendation that says you must address this and these are the things you must do to do it. So I think no noise from us is a positive statement, if that's helpful.
Sorry, thank you.
I just think to add to the discussion and debate, I think, you know, sustainability has come up quite a bit, and I think you know, as was evidenced by the risk register, the red risk on funding is about sustainability. You know, and it is something that is out with it's not out with our control. I mean, we can cut costs, but that generally is not what we believe is the right way forward. And that, as evidenced from a year ago, is that we've done that cost reduction exercise. We've got to a core stable position, and now it's about making sure that the funding aligns to it. And I think generally, this is me speaking, and I think the reason why it hasn't is I think reserves muddies the water. Having at one stage when I first joined, the reserves were going north of £10 million. Now, as a funder, the department could sit there and say, well, you've got funds in excess of your annual allocation. Does that make sense just to keep giving you more and more and it to be going up and up? And the answer is no, it doesn't. So it certainly has gone the other way. It's heading down towards the minimum levels. So I think it's just acknowledging that with the department, with the likes of Sally and Andy, and making sure that whilst they can't give us any guarantees in relation to year 3 and 4 and 5, because this is going to be covered by another spending review and possibly another government, what they can do is give an opinion as to whether those assumptions that we use are reasonable. And it's that reasonable judgment that I think is going to be critical, and that's what's going to come out in the terms of the budget papers that get positioned to board. They're going to require a step change in grants in years 3 and 4 and beyond, or 3, 4 and 5 actually, and then equally in 5, 6 and 7 years. So, and that just needs to be very transparent, which it will be. It's the probably, it's the one, people ask me what keeps you awake at night, and it's sustainability. That's the one thing that I worry about, which probably gives Karen some assurance that I'm worrying about it. But that's my job as 151 to worry about it. And worry, but see a pathway for resolution is important. I think if I ever worried and didn't see a pathway, that would be a concern.
Grand, thanks, Paul. Kevin.
Well, I think Paul's probably already answered it to some degree. I was going to ask around the issue of reserves, and Karen's already sort of hinted that she'll continue to flag it. But I suppose my question was around, well, if we've now got a funding allocation for the next 2 years, and we live within our means, so we address your issue around managing to the cost base. Will that statement recur next year then, that we still need to? Because then by then we wouldn't be reliant on reserves, would we, to fill any gaps? So presumably that pressure would ease, would it not? I suppose was where I was coming from.
The way the cost base looks as it stands right now is for the next 2 years, we would require a small element, and we're talking about somewhere around about $500,000 as previously reported in early years of support from reserves, because we can, and it's again, I think it's I've said this on many occasions. I think reserves. There's a lot of focus on reserves in this organisation, and it's a pity because actually they need to be there purely as a to meet our statutory obligations. If things stopped and things change of government, we don't know what TFN does, let's stop them completely. Well, we'd have to have some funds in place to meet our statutory obligations. That's what it is. They're not reserves for anything else. So they're just excess levels of grant that were received. And I think they do muddy the water. And the closer we can get to a view that says, here's our cost base going forward, and here's an agreement from the department, whether it be 1, 2 or 3 years, formal or informal, to support that, the better we will be from a sustainability viewpoint. So and I think what's happened is that from 3 years ago, 10.5 million I think was the figure in reserves, and it's now we'll go forward from at the end of March it'll be 3.3, and that's because of the reductions that were done in year by the department. So the department have forced the reserves to drop. The interesting question then is at what stage do you then create an alignment between cost base and funding? So it's an interesting discussion, and it's one that we will need to have before the 23rd of March with the department.
Right, that's cool. Conscious that we're a little tight on time, but similarly it'd be wrong to curtail discussion. So if anybody has anything else, I'm sure Karen would love offline questions and comments, so I'll preempt that.
Yeah, Absolutely. If anyone does want to get in touch, I'm happy to deal with any queries.
Bless you. I think Campbell enjoyed that offer of your help. Bless you, Karen. Thank you. So I did want to give Emma sufficient time to talk about annual governance statement, and then if members have the capacity at the end, I did just want to talk about committee membership going forward, just for a few minutes once everybody was here. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, it won't take very long. This is really just to say what we're doing. There's a as those of you who've belonged to the committee for such a long time will know, there's a statutory obligation to prepare an annual governance statement every year, and this sort of umbrella is to make sure that because we're in receipt of public funding through DFT, that we're using that properly and that we're getting value for money. Within that, there are some principles from the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accountancy, the CIPFA ones, and that's traditionally how we and most authorities set their annual governance statements out. So the principles are all in the report, but they're essentially around integrity and ethical values, openness and stakeholder engagement, outcomes around economic, social, environmental benefits, making sure we have proper procedures to secure those outcomes, the capacity of both the organisation and individuals, so leadership essentially, on that latter one, risk management and robust internal controls, and finally good practices around transparency, reporting and audit. The things that we've looked at before would be the constitution, contract procurement rules, our financial regulation and scrutiny, and risk management. And frankly, having attended this committee meeting, it's all the sorts of things that you talk about. This is meant to hopefully present in an accessible and summary sort of way. It is presented with the accounts at the end of in autumn, and therefore Paul and Daniela will know we've had a discussion about this, that it is essentially a historic account, so it's showing what we have done in the last 12 months and making sure that's compliant. But in those discussions, we've also picked up on the fact that there have been significant changes in the organisation in terms of the funding allocation, the change from co-client to co-sponsor, the Centre of Excellence, and actually the STP2, which will be coming out this year, which is again shows the direction of travel for TFN, and those need to, I think, be reflected in what we have done and making sure those processes are fit for purpose going forward. The general timetable will be that the next draft will be hopefully pretty much in good form for your July committee meeting, and it will be signed off in the board meeting in September with the accounts. But I have been, it's been very valuable attending this particular session, because things like the deep dive and risk register, we do already mention those in the previous sort of versions and of the AGS. But I think the emphasis that's been placed on those sort of exercises is really valuable, rather than just paying them sort of lip service. And the fraud, anti-fraud, again, that will be picked up on, but if it's clearly of some concern, so we want to make sure that again, it's just not something that's referred to, it's something that we're actively looking at. And again, things like the GDPR audit, and try to demonstrate some flexibility, I think, over an ever-changing environment. That's comes through to me very, very clearly, that the AGS should show that the organisation is fit for purpose in that respect. So that's, as I say, very whistle stop there, because I'm conscious of time, but any questions or comments, much appreciated, so that we can make sure that we reflect members' concerns and I think hopefully we'll produce something that looks and feels a lot easier to address for stakeholders and individuals than perhaps in the past, where it's been quite wordy and long.
Thanks, Emma. I did read the specific objective the point about accessibility, readability, which I think is to be applauded. It's something that I've spoken to Paul and others about previously is an emphasis on evidencing that controls are operating as intended, rather than simply being a list of controls. I think that always adds value to this kind of statement. The only other comment that I had just ahead of others is July for a September approval seems a little. We're not giving ourselves a huge amount of time to adopt, reflect thoughts, challenges from the committee. So, just really a question is whether there is an opportunity to share a version of that ahead of July, such that we have an opportunity to give it some time and consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest it's circulated sometime before the committee, so in June or something like that, maybe with holidays even in May, so that specific comments can be included rather than it simply being a committee session. I don't know, Paul, does that sound good, Daniela, to get some sort of quite detailed comments along the way?
We can get feedback whenever we want. The key is that we got the product to share. So I'd sort of possibly reverse the question and at what stage do you feel that we have the finished product or a good draft to be able to share with the members? And if that's sooner rather than later, then great.
Sure.
So I don't know. I mean, is there a view? Do you have a view as to when we would have a good
well, I'm
policy
hoping to
draft?
get something to Julie before I sort of leave. So that should be in the next few weeks and stuff like that. But then it'll be up to how that's progressed.
Yeah. So I think yes is the if you can feed that back to Julie, that would be very useful. With a view that we could. I mean, I think it kind of feels like mission to the members to give them progress on at least two matters, if not more.
That sounds like a plan.
Grand, thank you. Did I take it from that, Emma, that this is also your last committee meeting? I mean, if it is, I mean,
it is. Yes,
it's a meeting of goodbyes, which isn't.
It is indeed.
Well, it's. Well, thank you and good luck.
Thank
you. Any other questions or did you have anything else to add, Emma, in terms of process, or is there any other questions from anybody else? Grand. Splendid. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
So I think we've managed to carve out about 2.5 or 3 minutes, which is something. And the bit you missed, Kevin, at the beginning, we spent 15 minutes saying goodbye to Keith and David. So you're welcome to add to that. But I say we've spoken about committee membership previously, and I think we've acknowledged that there is something of a challenge in terms of securing a forum on a consistent basis, but conscious, as I said earlier, that we've lost Councillor Robinson, we're losing Councillor Little and David as well in short order. Just an opportunity whilst we were here, whether anybody had any comments, thoughts, or observations that they wanted to share, because obviously we've got to take that on board, and Paul's got to take that on board, and others, in terms of how we fill the gaps.
Perhaps if I could tell you what's going on behind the scenes, certainly in terms of the independent members and to a certain extent the members themselves. But my own personal view, and I've been talking to Julie about this, is that we should be trying to encourage a sort of cyclical arrangement. And I think we've benefited from people being members for a significant period of time. Kevin and Keith being two great examples. I think we should try and, and I think if people want to stay, that's wonderful. But I think sometimes, acknowledging the fact that the 3 years is quite a long time for people to be involved, it's quite good to have that sort of cyclical, introduction, development, and potentially partnering, and then thanks and waving goodbye. So I think we've got to try and get a bigger volume of members, both independent and members, board members, that we're able to develop, cycle, get very good value, and then thank for their involvement and let them move on. That's my view, and we've not quite managed to get there. I do wonder whether it's because, well, I think we probably just need to focus on it for a particular area. I think sometimes the elections cause a problem, that's inevitable, but we have to just work around that, don't we? So there's a recruitment process about to go out for independent members, and I believe we'll have to raise membership either at GPC, or General Purposes Committee, or at Main Board, to see if we can identify potential candidates. But I would like to, as opposed to going out and saying, well, who's interested, I would personally like to be a bit more targeted and to sort of look for people that, to ask them whether they would consider it for 1, 2 or 3 years, with the idea of bringing skill sets into the group that we would need.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Paul. I think, from a good governance perspective, having a cyclical approach to the committee would make sense. Elsewhere, tend to see people serving tenures of 3 years and not more than 6, and I think that's seen as a bit of a sort of a standard, isn't it, across the public sector. Increasingly, I think deterring these sort of 9-year tenures, and I think there's an argument for having Keith's for having a combination of targeted and broader adverts for members, to for people. It's a tricky one, isn't it? But I think being clear about what skill set and experience you're looking for would be helpful. And we've all got networks. I'm sure we could help with some of that.
Thanks, Kevin. Anybody else, whilst we're sort of in this sort of thought or observation gathering exercise? I mean, it's I think everybody acknowledges that it's difficult. It's finding the right.
Yeah, Graham. TFN will obviously, as Paul has said, I'll be at the last meeting, and I'll be raising this issue as well and encouraging people to join. There will be new members joining TFN because I represent Cumbria. There are 2 new councils taken over in Cumbria, so potentially 2 new members to go to TFN, or they may do a different share. But I also, in our partnership board, we have the local enterprise partnership members who sit at Transport for the North as well, and they're usually business representatives. So it may be an opportunity, and I'll raise it at the meeting, that perhaps we offer anybody from the local enterprise partnerships who might feel they've got some opportunity to join this board as well, and bring their skills along as well. But just in closing, again, just a big thank you to everybody. It's been an enjoyable experience, and best wishes for the future for all of you.
Thanks, Keith.
Same to you, Keith.
All the best, Keith and David.
Yeah.
All the best.
Take care.
Grand. Right. So I don't want to keep people unnecessarily, because we've all missed an early lunch. Maybe we can get the second sitting wherever we are, if we're lucky. So again, Keith, David, thank you. Thank you for contributions. And I think our next meeting is slated for the 21st of July. I believe Andrea said earlier that it was a in-person meeting.
It isn't. It's a consultation meeting.
Again, there you go. We're off the travel hook once again in July. Grand, right, excellent. Unless anybody else has got any final points, we'll leave it there. Grand, thank you all.